Hey, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Peter Boghossian. I am delighted to introduce my guest, author and cultural critic, Will Reilly. He's a buddy of mine. He's a gadfly to mainstream narratives concerning race, crime, and gender ideology. His books include Taboo, 10 Facts You Can't Talk About, and Crime Hoax, How the Left is Selling a Fake Race War. That book had a profound effect on me, and it changed fundamentally the way I think about some issues, not just hate crimes, but the relationship of the media to social phenomenon. His upcoming book is Lies, My Liberal Teacher Told Me, and it will be available in February. Will's writing is widely published, very widely published. You can find his work in the Wall Street Journal, the National Review, USA Today, Commentary Magazine, Tablet, Quillette, and just all over the place. He's an associate professor of political sciences at Kentucky State University, and it's great to see you again, man. Great to see you, Will. What a pleasure to talk.
Great to be back on the pod, Peter. Glad to be here.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I appreciate it. Your Twitter feed is one of the top 2 or 3 Twitter feeds that I always I search by for you, and then I go into your feed and I look at it just about daily. It's absolutely fantastic. So thanks. I think one of the reasons that I respect your work so much, and I'm really not blowing smoke up your skirt, I'm just being really serious, is that you are. And when we were in Montana, I think you said this explicitly, like you're an evidence guy, right? You're a data, you're a numbers guy. Like, so you look at the data. So talk to me about how did you get that skill? What does it mean? And what does it enable you to do?
Well, I think that, a lot of my skills have come over a pretty interesting life. I think I have some social media game because I actually used to run a small social media company with my buddy Odyssey Trejo, who I don't think would mind being shouted out here. So, we used to do Facebook and all that sort of thing. This is Twitter in some cases for these kind of hip Midwest nightlife style brands. And I got used to arguing with people online, being funny about it. And I've had a range of different jobs in and outside of academia over the years. But in terms of the evidence-based skills, I suppose a lot of that would come from just formal study. At Southern Illinois University, which is my Ph.D. granting institution, political science program is pretty good. And they have a really focused kind of quantitative methods track. It's called 500A through, I think, D. I did all that. I had trained as a lawyer before that. I went to the University of Illinois, which is a bit larger, better known institution. So I did legal research, writing. And so, what my idea was always, I'm just sort of a Midwest guy. There are plenty of schools as good as those two, although, not less than 100 in the USA. But it was just sort of, the background was very much like, what is the factual basis for what you're trying to say,
exactly.
Counselor? And when I got out into academia, and because of that background, because of business employment, legal training, I wasn't really all that worried about not being able to secure a job. So I was able to comment pretty honestly. It struck me that a lot of what I was seeing was just bullshit. People would say things on the basis of really no evidentiary claim count whatsoever. And I started using, legal writing and research techniques, polyometric writing and research techniques, basic stata, SPSS analysis. Even philosophical techniques. And you know how to do a great deal of this, at least as well. But to look at some of these claims, like Taboo, my second book, just takes 10 really most prominent stories in mainstream center-left news media at the time. So, for example, is there a wave of extreme police violence against Black people, especially Black males, who aren't doing anything at all, that are just innocent brothers who are being murdered, which Ben Crump said, which Chernobyl said. This is obviously part of the narrative. That's chapter 1. And what I found out was that was untrue to an insane degree. I might have been second in this race, actually. Heather McDonald at Manhattan Institute's done great work on this, so shout to her. But just the Washington Post had started publishing The Counted by this point. You're able just to go in and pull out their data set and see, well, in a typical year, the total number of unarmed Black men that are killed by the police is like 12.
Right.
These figures like 1,000 were coming out of nowhere. People are just making them up. And it was just that's something that I've found in a lot of different arenas. And I've tried to apply the same standards of evidence to writing about race, writing about gender, and so on. And for that matter, the stuff on the hard right, too, the alt-right, ethno-nationalism, that wouldn't be applied anywhere else. I guess there's nothing really special about it. It's just that we're not studying like the location of nuclear weapons in the former Soviet Union. We're studying these really influential issues that our society spends all this time talking about. So it's unfortunate that so much of the writing there is just trash.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to push back on something. It depends on how you define special. Like, I do think No, almost nobody's doing that. Everybody is not just in the mainstream media, which I want to get to your book, Hate Crimes Hoax, but very few people are actually looking at the data. If you parse out the data for the number 12, this is in Matt Thornton's book, The Gift of Violence. Many of those people are like, oh yeah, you blurbed that. It was a great book. Many of those people are like, I think one case was attacked officer with a toaster, if memory serves me correct. And the attacking someone with a toaster is not classified. It is still classified as unarmed man. So we're going to talk about that. We do these Mentimeter things that Reed does, and so we do polls and such for people. But I really respect the evidence-based approach and crunching the numbers. James Lindsay and I published a piece. If you want to be good at philosophy, study math and science. And so there's something about cutting through ideology by looking at data, which you do. And people, to be blunt with you, I see on social media, you get a lot of hate for that, right?
Well, I'm pretty popular on social media. I have about 100,000 followers. Most of the comments that I get are pretty positive, but that's because they're coming from my friends and my fan base. I get hate in the sense that people will sometimes try to come argue with myself and the group of sort of junior academics and business types and, turf ex-feminists and so on the page, some current ones as well, and lose most of the time. So I'm not really I grew up in the hood, although not like hyper ghetto project. And I had an interesting life after that. Like I traveled overseas, I had a bunch of real jobs. So, it's hard to take social media dislike all that seriously. Like I think I'm generally successful in arguments, and it's also not real. There's a famous line from Tyler, the Creator, excuse the language, but like, how is cyberbullying real? Nigga, just log off. And that's kind of my opinion. Like if I'm in a long debate and it's going negatively and my fiance who you've met is like, okay, let's go get dinner. You just turn off the computer. So I enjoy social media and I don't take the hostility I get that seriously, but I think the response is mostly positive. Most of the people even on the other side tend to like a lot of what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think that's true. I agree. So I want to talk about two things or three things. Are you ever called like a race traitor or what have you for your views? That's one thing I wanted to ask you, because I have seen, because I'm not one of your creepy stalkers on social media, but I do love your Twitter feed and I do look at the comments on the posts, and I have, if memories, and I'm pretty sure that's true, I have seen things like that. Are you aware of that, or you just don't read those?
Well, I read them. Now, one of my things, something I agree with the center-left writer Matt Iglesias on, is that if people say consistent dumb crap online, I just block them. Yeah. Like if someone I didn't know whose profile picture was a Roman statue or a vagina or like a frog smoking a cigar was just like, but like all these are pretty common. Like, the trad guy, the feminist, and the Pepe. Yeah. But like if someone had said was like something, you're a race traitor, you coon. Like, okay, get out of here. So there'd be a zero impact of that on me as like a businessman or something. But like in reality though, I will say one thing: the people that say stuff like that are almost invariably upper class white liberals. Like almost without a doubt, even alt-right guys who seem to view me as sort of an honorable opponent. I debated Jared Taylor once, or just like, no, doctor, I think you're very wrong about the effects of ethno-nationalism. Black people are just like, bro, you're wild on that one. The cops, they don't report everyone that they beat. And there's something of a valid point there, actually. But like the people that say things like your ancestors would be ashamed of you are invariably like blue-haired Claremont College women with, half black boyfriends. Like it's a specific demographic of person that we've both met at cocktail parties.
Yeah. Interesting. So, so one thing I've been thinking about, for those who don't know what we're laughing at, I'm not going to read it, but it was a quote. It's a tweet. It's a quotation that Will just said. So one thing I've been thinking about, and I increasingly use these conversations to help me clarify issues. Like I see in your work, and you'll say something like that the left believe, or like, I don't understand why. I don't understand. Like if you're just looking at data, right? Like take it out of the domain of race, and you're just looking at data, for example, anthropogenic global warming. Why would somebody say that this is a right-left issue? Like, the policy prescriptions of those are obviously right-left, but like, I don't understand why we have to, why is this a right-left issue? Like, I don't get, like, the data is just the data, or am I missing something?
I think that when it comes to anthropogenic climate change, very often, so first of all, I tend to agree with you. I think that things worked a lot better in this damn country when, John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, go back before that, Roosevelt and Eisenhower the African-American radical leader was Martin Luther King. When, there were more adults in power for a lot of different reasons. And so compromise on a lot more things was possible. As a political science professor, I know we've been funding our government via unwieldy omnibus bills for the past decade or more, if I have that correct. So the idea of just being able to vote on something like funding for the Department of Education, where the Democrats will give it and say, okay, we'll do this on sex ed, and the GOP will say, we'll do this on school lunches. That's a good thing. That's something we've generally lost. And so I agree with you there, Peter. I think that the flip side of that, though, is that in many of these cases, what people are debating is not the issue itself, but kind of what you said, which is what to do about it. So in the case of anthropogenic climate change, like, I actually am not a climate change denier in any sense of that word. I absolutely agree with the best Swedish study. So does our boy, Michael Schellenberger, by the way, who's done more reading about this than anyone I know. The world will be 2.375 degrees warmer in 125 years. The question is what that means. Like, that's a more greenhouse gas driven warming phase, as I understand, than, the dry ass or the
methane.
But it's the question is, well, like, will the world being the same temperature it was on 4 other climactic occasions, will that change society? Can't we stop that by planting trees? I think that's where you get into real debates, where one side says, well, actually, the problem is one side says we're not going to do anything, right? And the other side says we're all going to die. So I think the people that are like, why not plant these trees along the coastline, they're not being heard. And I think that is the adult solution. Sorry to keep rambling there, but I think that's why it becomes a policy debate, because the question is about solutions. And with a lot of these things, like defunding the police and crime, you have one team saying, well, there's not a crime problem, and throwing out real but used in a nonsensical fashion stats, like things were worse in 87. And then you have the other team saying, well, we need to build prisons and mountainsides a la Bukele. And this makes that down the center approach of why not just arrest people who are currently committing felonies kind of difficult to get to.
Okay, so there's a lot there, and there's a lot I want to talk about. I don't want to go down the climate change rabbit hole, but I just use that as an example. I saw this crazy clip on Twitter or X or whatever it's called yesterday, I think last night. 2 crazy clips. One of a guy being spanked by a drag queen in front of children, and the other one, I think it was a congressman reading some really explicit passages. I am not a prude at all, and I was like, "Holy shit!" That are in children's books. And every time I see that, it's always framed as, screw the right, screw the left, screw the. But shouldn't the question just be like, should a politician be spanked by a drag queen in front of children? Should children be having books about anal sex I don't understand. Like, I understand why people make that a right-left issue, and I think one of the ways to cut through that is through data. And I see that you do that, but I also see that you will say, like, I can't remember. I just was reading something like lies my liberal teacher told me, as opposed to like just lies my teacher told me. Period. And that the teacher happened to be liberal, but the liberalness was not a feature of the lies, right? Or no?
Yeah, I think that's a good, honorable question from an honorable guy. But I think that the very simple answer, other than, I'm a center-right writer, is that, and to some extent, that is part of the answer. Like, authors don't write their book titles. A book has an audience. You don't want to sell 4,000 copies all time and so on. But beyond that, the reality is that a lot of most of the nonsense in this sector is coming from one side. So I mean, when you look at academia, when you look at the world of the university professoriate, right
Yeah.
now it slants, if I recall correctly, 93-7 left against the right.
Yeah.
So in secondary education, if you look at the percentage of educated liberal women in that field, is probably not very different. So when you see lies being told, they're told in one specific direction 93+% of the time. And that is important. We can't both sides that too much. Although organizations
Yeah.
we both worked with, like FIRE, will say, okay, we don't want a lot of the extreme hard left or hard right religious right stuff in the schools either. But I mean, when I researched lies, all of the lies in the book, like for example, Native Americans were peaceful people that were unprovokedly massacred by the whites,
Lived in harmony with the land. Yeah.
Yeah, and that it's absurdly nonsensical. I mean, the Aztec Empire was one of the most densely populated societies on Earth at that time. Not very sophisticated with wheeled technology, but elite when it came to boating technology. They had an entire system based around basically farming humans. They would bring people from what they called the Chichimeca, which means like dog meat people, territories to their capital in these annual sacrifices that killed in 1 year 84,000 people. You know, the Spaniards that fought them were as brutal and as suited to war and had better technology, although they won largely because of their disease environment that they came from. But I mean, to present these people as avatars of peace is absurd. And that's the direction that this stuff is coming from, this left-wing, Gaia worshiping kind of tangential angle. So, I mean, I think I would be, 90% as effective in calling out lies from the right. It's just writing as an academic and all that. You don't see many. In terms of like things Trump said and so on, I have no problem saying, well, this is a lie from the right. But there aren't an enormous number of religious right curricula outside of the homeschooling sector that are affecting, say, inner city kids.
Yeah, that's a key point. I guess I've always found it more effective if you don't, although I will fully admit I'm terrible at this. I try not to name the left, or I always name the woke. I try to stick to the issues. Like, Reed, pull up that drag queen thing again, that dude getting spanked there, or Gav. Oh, did we lose it?
Yeah, but just like while we're talking about it, it looks like it's going to be up in 2 seconds. But like, I mean, like, what political party do you think the drag queen votes for, if any? Like, there's like, just like, so for example, with the books in the schools, okay, that's one where I actually do not. I got into a friendly but fairly heated exchange with the founder of Moms for Liberty about this.
Oh yeah.
Where I said, like, look, if you are going to have, this is not appropriate in grade school. But it's absurd to say that you shouldn't have basic, like, what is consent and what is a clitoris, sex education in a senior high school. Like, the average kid starts having sex at 15 or 16, or at least did during my time as a scholastic student. So, I mean, if there's some marriage manual in a school library that has like line drawings of the basic sexual positions, and except for genderqueer, this seems to be mostly what people are talking about.
I was thinking genderqueer. Yeah.
But the reason there's such a focus on that one book is that there aren't a lot of pornographic books in school libraries. Like, I actually made myself read genderqueer, and it's a little gross, but like the things that are presented as illustrations of graphic sex are actually illustrations of people using sex. It's like oral sex clumsily performed on a sex toy while people are mostly clothed. If you look at the full picture, that's why it's not dubiously legal to put that online, I would suppose. There are a few things in the book that are inappropriate for kids, probably teens. But if that's the greatest example of porn in the schools, I don't think there's a lot of porn in the schools. I don't think there are school libraries that have copies of the Kama Sutra available for checkout, much less like Hustler magazine. So that actually is something where I think the right is really kind of stretching the point, actually. A lot of these books, like Not All Boys Are Blue, you could easily remove the unpaid sex scene. The issue seems to be that a lot of middle-class Black parents don't want a gay Black love story in their school. And I think parents very often, if you're on the school board, you have the right to vote on that. But let's be honest about it. So I didn't mean to swing back to the left here, actually, but I do think there are problems from both sides. But again, just reiterating that who did the drag queen vote for point, 90+% of the problems in the school system are coming from one side. Being a bit proactive about books isn't the same thing as writing the curriculum.
Yeah, and I think that's the case. I've often been criticized because I attack the left and not the right equally, but I would attack the right if they dominated the academic institutions, right? So it's not, and that's the pond in which I swim. That's what I'm familiar with. And so that's one of the targets of my and I've always been struck by it's the same tools that you'd use scientific skepticism or anything else. It's the same kind of what's the evidence, data analysis, et cetera. Speaking of which, I want to talk about your book, Hate Crimes Hoax, that had a profound effect on me. Like, okay, so tell us in a minute or less, what is Hate Crimes Hoax about?
Hate crime hoax in one sentence is about the fact that most of the highest profile hate crime and hate incident stories over the past 4 or 5 years turned out to be complete BS. I mean, Jussie Smollett, Yasmin Saweed, etc.
Okay, so first, like, what gave you the thought to, like, how did you even figure that out? I mean, the media narrative is this hegemonic, totalizing media narrative. Why would you even, like, what gave you the idea to think that some of this stuff was a hoax in the first place?
Well, I mean, you saw that it was. I mean, I keep an eye on the news, and I actually, I used to commute by train to Center City, Chicago. I'd read the agate type portions of our Tribune and New York's Journal. And I mean, I just kept seeing that a bunch of these cases that were nationally promoted were falling apart. I mean, part of this, when I was in Chicago, maybe 2012 to 14, just before I came down here, finishing up graduate school, there were a whole series of these cases. And I say this when I do like my origin story that turned out not to be real.
Yeah.
There was a student at the University of Chicago. I'll stop naming the guy after all these years, but young professional now, but he was a student activist, and he claimed that an entire online hacker group called the U Chicago Electronic Army had been following him around, messaging his computer from all these different portals, threatening him with rape and death. That was one of them. Another one, Velvet Rope Ultra Lounge, a bar in our closest inner suburb, burned to the ground, and all these awful gay slurs, faggot and so on, were written through it, right? Yeah. I mean, so this was universally attributed to haters. There was multiple. I mean, the University of Wisconsin Parkside had an incident where someone apparently put up a series of posters threatening all the black students on campus with violent death, on and on and on. And basically, long story short, they all turned out to be fakes. Like the Chicago student, Derek Cockley. Oh, but anyway, this guy was just messaging himself. Like, he apparently didn't know how IP tracking works. So he'd just go on one computer and like send a message to his own Facebook or something like that. Or like he'd send a message from a dummy profile to one of his social media accounts. And the FBI got involved. The campus police weren't at this level, but they caught him rapidly. And I know civilians that could have done this. The Wisconsin Parkside case, it turned out that the whole thing was a fake. And one of the clues was that the black student who was responsible had printed out a threat list of all the black students on campus, and they mostly had fairly ethnic names. And her name was the only one on the list that was spelled correctly. So when the police started investigating these people, they found this person, Michaela, I believe the name may have been, and set her down, questioned her. She broke and revealed that the whole thing was not real. There had been reports of nooses on campus, and the idea was that these black students were in serious danger. None of that was real. And again, the other one? Oh, Velvet Rope Ultra Lounge turned out to be, not unusually for the Windy City, but an insurance fraud. So this guy had a very large payment due on his bar. He had apparently set it on fire himself, collected a check. All of this was just, no one knew until his boy was arrested for like drunken driving with a woman, like multiple crimes in another state, and said, well, there's something I could tell you in exchange for leniency. And this became a really well-known insurance case that's still used in that industry's press as an example of, how you can spot fraud. But it just struck me, okay, so we had 3 or 4 of these cases that, the city was up in arms about. People were talking, at least in the Chicago student scene, about racism being everywhere, so on down the line, and none of them was real. We keep hearing about these stories, then they vanish from the media. How often are they just fake?
Good question.
And I decided down the road when I had a sabbatical or something, I'd take a look, and I did, and that became the book.
So if you're not comfortable with this question, obviously you don't have to answer because it is outside or maybe it's not, I don't know, your domain of expertise, but like, why do people do this? Like, what would be why?
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally comfortable speculating about things as just a smart, regular citizen, which I encourage people to do. But I would say, like, in practice, I am a trained social science researcher. We did look at this for the book, and there seem to be 2 reasons. One of them is just sort of banal criminality. Like the guy who burnt down his bar in Chicago because he owed too much money to the wrong people. I mean, that's hardly a novel story for that city. I mean, so the idea was the insurance company will send me a check for $200. I won't have to put up with all these hipsters and, gender flexing students and, just regular Chicagoans who might cause some violence. I'm going to go do whatever else I want. I'm no longer going to run this busy business that's a bit of a money drain. So that's just the most banal, basic reason.
Yeah. And so bracketing those. So yeah, I understand. I'm curious as to the second reason.
Great. Yeah. The second reason I think is we've given a great deal of, I once said on Tucker Carlson's program, I believe, that the simplest way to break this down is that the demand for racism really exceeds the supply. Yeah. So we've created this sort of power that goes along with victimization. And this doesn't mean you should disregard most claims. Most claims are real, but we've also seen an upsurge in fake rape claims. I mean, one of these almost took down Rolling Stone recently. I mean, I've known guys in my life that were affected by this. Hate crime hoaxes are just part of a subset of these things. I mean, we're seeing 20% of young people now say they are LGBT and a member of a quote unquote oppressed class. But if you ask them in detail, none of them are gay. They are almost all bisexual in that sort of party going way, or they identify as queer, which means very little, or they say they're non-binary, so they're neither men nor women, but only in gender terms, just on and on and on with the bullshit, some might say. The same 1% of young men seem to be attracted to sex primarily with men. The same 1% of young women seem to be attracted to sex primarily with women. But despite that, you have an environment where a quarter of young people say they are queer. What does that mean? That's a question I think ties into this. Ibram Kendi actually did some of the best quant work of his life.
One of our favorite people, yes.
Yeah, but this time he did some good work. I mean, he looked at a study that had been done, reanalyzed their methods. This was a piece in The Hill, I think. Like Ibram Kendi says that at least a fifth of white students must be lying about their race. When he looked at these people applying at college, he was right. Now, when Kendi posted that on Twitter, he got roasted and took it down.
Yeah, I remember that because that would show that the systemic racism thing would be a lie. In fact, that would be advantageous to be African-American.
Yeah. And I mean, apparently, like while he was number crunching, he didn't think about that. So he immediately reversed track and said, the fact, and what he actually said was pretty intelligent, even though it's nonsense. But it was, well, the fact that people think it's an advantage to be black in the USA doesn't mean it is. But obviously, most of these students weren't pretending to be black. They were pretending to be Native American, Castilian, Spanish, things that could never be checked. One ancestor somewhere. I mean, I myself have a bit of a, golden tone. So it was just all this kind of stuff was going on, has been going on. So to kind of get to the point, we've created a level of value that's attached to victimization, and that's making people pursue victimization. And there's no purer form of victimization than saying you were beaten or raped by the other man. That, the Jussie Smollett, these two big, ugly Trump guys with patriotic ski masks on, carrying a rope, a gallon bottle of bleach, these symbols of oppression. Were they going to dye him white? They come out from behind the shrubbery in the safest neighborhood in the country, for this reason at least, and attack him. That sounded horrific. It sounded like confirmation of narrative, but of course it was made up. And most stuff like this is.
And so whenever I hear that, subsequent to reading your book, whenever I hear that, I think hoax. Like hoax is now my default. And then I also think to myself, I kind of feel a little guilty in a sense because I don't want to be the kind of guy that denies objective reality. Or let's look at
more than a third. It wasn't just a fifth. Okay.
More than a third of white students lied about their capitalized W, about their race on college applications, and about half of these applicants lied about being Native American. More than 3/4 of these students who lied about their race were accepted. Okay. So are there actual hate crimes? Like,
yeah. I mean, I think it's important that this be recognized when kind of heterodox people are talking about this stuff. And I mean, I said this myself in the context of sort of rape allegations and so on. Like, yes, of course, there are real hate crime allegations, sexual assault allegations. I mean, sexual assault allegations, probably 80 to 90% majority are real. Yeah. The reason that we notice the fakes, and for hate crimes over 50, I mean, it's difficult to speculate. It also depends on what you're defining as a hate crime. So, I mean,
right.
Up to 9, I mean, a very high percentage, 90% in some categories, of FBI listed hate incidents. There was a fight after a bar closed where slurs were exchanged. Those are probably real incidents, just to say that bluntly. What we see with the fakes is that most of the most flamboyant, disturbing incidents, not white guy and a black guy call each other racial slurs outside a nightclub, or a woman is groped or something like that. But like the Smollett situation, I mean, you can actually do a list. I mean, Jussie Smollett, Covington Catholic, where a group of high school students and athletes allegedly surrounded a Native American Indian elder, chanted "Build the Wall," which, as I say, is a damned ironic thing to say to an Indian, threatened to take his sacred rain drum from him. Yasmin Saweed, I mean, this is the young woman who said she was surrounded by 3 or 4 photogenic frat boys on the New York 6, and she was attacked in this sexually fraught way and had her beloved hijab torn away.
Yeah,
I mean, just on and on with them. I mean, Air Force Academy, where a
Tawana Brawley when I was younger. Yeah, and that hijab story was interesting. Boy, and what a scandal that caused. Basically, the whole police department was looking for these thugs. So there are genuine instances where this occurs. My question to you is, bracketing the financial thing, like the bar burning down, it seems to me, and if I'm wrong, let me know, that many Black people in this country, and I agree with you, I agree with Reed, this problem has been overdiagnosed, and I want to look at solutions. I want to understand the problem, and I want to look at solutions for why our fellow citizens feel so disenfranchised from the political and economic system, why they have actually been left out of opportunities, and what we can do. And I'm hoping to talk to you about that. But first, it seems to me pretty obvious that we have a large number of African Americans in this country who believe that the entire system, not before redlining, 50s, 40s, miscegenation laws, none of that stuff, the entire system, the current system and the regulatory apparatus is literally set up against them. And I want to show you some clips from when we were in, I think one is in Arizona and one is when we were in Puerto Rico, and I do that spectrum street epistemology where I put people on the lines, and we had African Americans participate in this. And in one sense, it was absolutely heartbreaking to me that these individuals feel that they just feel that the system is intentionally betraying them. And so I wanted to talk to you about that, talk to you about why they think that, and then talk to you about that with an eye toward what we can do as a country and as a people to fix that problem. Because the fact that that exists, independent of the relationship to reality, is a problem. It's like what Glenn Lowry said on Jordan Peterson's podcast, even if every single conviction of a Black man in this country is fair and just, and they had adequate legal representation, there is a massive problem with having so many young Black men incarcerated. Okay, so Reed or Gav, could you play the clip? The U.S. is systemically racist, but before I do that, how do you define systemically racist?
White privilege.
How do you define systemically racist?
I define it as not, for all systems, not allowing equality.
Not allowing equality.
Not treating one as equal as another person.
What do you mean? One race?
Yeah, one race as equal.
Okay. How do you define it?
A system that is designed for a specific race or ethnicity to fail in life.
A system that is designed for a system that, sorry?
A system that's designed for a specific race or ethnicity to fail in life.
Thank you. Pause. Okay. What is your take on just that?
My honest take, if you're talking about 2023 America, is that's just fantasy. I mean, so this is one of the big points. This is actually chapter 4 of Taboo. But I mean, my argument in that book goes beyond the claim that each individual woke kind of Perry argument is wrong, i.e. there's no epidemic of interracial crime from whites against blacks, or for that matter, really from blacks against whites. That's chapter 2. to the deeper point that the very core arguments here are incoherent to the point of being sort of nonsensical. So, I mean, systemic racism, I was once asked to define wokeness. Like, what do you right-wing boys mean when you say woke? And I said that almost all woke ideas come down to one kind of tripartite system, which is the idea that all of society today is intentionally structured to oppress. One, and the group can vary, by the way. Like, pretty much every hard left ideology is just a lower IQ variant on Marxism. I think you might have told me this, actually. But it's just sort of, so like radical feminism, you replace the rich man who controls all of the means within society, who writes the law, with the man. Why do they call it the cockpit? The law is structured to benefit males in every or almost every situation. In critical race theory and Afrocentrist theory, I think this is actually my partner that said, "What a sexy and intelligent guest." That's
El Jingle 199. What a sexy and intelligent guest.
That's hilarious. Good stuff.
I can only speak to the latter.
But anyway, so that's funny stuff either way. But all right, so good eyes, ladies. But anyway, so I mean, when you talk about this, like critical race theory or Afrocentrist ideology, just takes the rich man and replaces him with the white man. So instead of the idea that all laws, like the laws of property ownership, the felony criminal codes, so on down the line, are structured to benefit the wealthy, the upper bourgeoisie, the idea is that they're structured to benefit whites. And we could go on and on with this. You even get into fringe stuff now, like fat studies, fat theory. I mean, I hear they have a journal of fat studies.
Yes,
you can
I've
get
actually published in that journal on my
Yeah, I'm kind of teasing because I mean that to me was one of the funniest. The publication you guys did there, right, was the argument that there should be a fat category in bodybuilding.
Yeah, pro bodybuilding. Thanks. I came up with that. I rather love that idea. Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting about SoCal 2 with you guys is that I've actually talked to very smart people. Rod Graham, I think, maybe Liam Bright. I don't want to implicate him in this unless he remembers that conversation. But Sam, what's his name, the well-known philosophical debater on Twitter. But they have argued, I don't think Liam was in this one, but they have argued that the papers that you guys published were completely legitimate. So, for example, that if you remove the racism, Mein Kampf actually makes a decent argument about social structure. The problem is that it targeted Jews.
Yeah.
So the feminist paper could have been publishable. Or that the dog park paper, you guys wrote a paper arguing that people's reactions to patterns of dog humping in parks, like male versus female dog, the leg or whatever, said something about gender dynamics. I've had feminists tell me that it does, that it's indicative that, you know, someone would prefer their dog be humped, their female dog be humped and their male dog be humped. So I think that the counter to this is that you actually published something like 7 or 8 of these nonsense papers. And this was one of them, that competitive bodybuilding should include very fat people. Like, many of them were just utterly indefensible. The penis is a theoretical concept. And I see these papers cited. So it's not as though there was one that was right on the verge that a journal published. The Journal of Fat Studies, the primary one of 2 or 3 journals in this area, published this nonsense about how bodybuilders should be fat. So that's just a point I wanted to make about that whole thing. But at any rate, so we're going back to, the idea of systemic racism. No, I don't think American society is intentionally structured to oppress. I went on a little ramble there, so I'll say this in 1 or 2 sentences.
No, you're fine.
This is a measurable, it's me, but this is a measurable thing. Oh, yeah. Okay. So they retracted it, huh? All right. Bastards. But humor aside, though, the idea that American society is intentionally structured to oppress Black people is actually a pretty serious claim, and it's a testable claim. So the way you would test it is to take 8 or 9 arenas of life, like, say, college admissions, Fortune 500 hiring of initial applicants. And unlike the list experiment studies that BS about this, you'd have to include affirmative action positions with a minority-owned firms, so on down the line. And you would look
at the music
industry.
Sorry, go ahead. I was just thinking that the music industry, sports, etc., like the whole
academia. Yeah. But no, I mean, so I'll say this after the first point, but like, if you actually look empirically at whether major systems like collegiate admissions, which is one of the most important things you're going to do in your life as a young man or woman, where do you go to school? Are you a Yale man, an Illinois guy? You know, where are you going? Michigan? The idea that is set up to oppress minorities is nonsensical. I mean, the advantage for Black applicants in the Ivy League or indeed the Big Ten is on the order of 350 points on the SAT. The test only goes up to 1,600. So when you run the empirical test, you see that the claim about systems is false. In fact, it's often reversed. You're at a significant disadvantage as an Asian or even white man, specifically white man, in fact, or white woman. So that's it. That it's wrong. I mean, another way to look at this would be who succeeds? Who are the wealthiest, most powerful groups in the country? Are those Anglo whites, or are those instead Asians, Nigerians, Jews, East Indians? And we already know the answer. The most successful white groups are groups like Armenians, Italians that have experienced intense prejudice in this country. So you can just test something and see if it's right. And if it's not, you discard it. The fascinating thing about these woke theories is that they've been proven wrong over and over and over again, but they're never discarded.
So this is what I struggle with. Independent of the fact that this is demonstrably false, he still legitimately not just thinks that, but feels that. And I think last time I was on your show, I said something about all this money that BLM raised point to a single school district that's primarily African American that's been helped. And you know, did they have good lunches now? Did they have? I mean, like I don't. Do you think that he feels that way because of the legacy of the historical accumulation of wealth and the fact that I think it is true that many African Americans are trapped in failing schools. I think it is that true that and the data is overwhelming for this. So again, this should not be a conservative point. This is a data point that people can make inferences from. We know that if there's an adult male in the home, likelihood of incarceration goes down, et cetera. I'm not going to get on that horse again, but that should not be a conservative position. Good. Hold off on those super chats just for now. I'm very easily distracted. I have I'm the world's worst multitasker. Okay, so where was I? Shit. I can't take any distractions.
You can jump in if you want.
Yeah, my brain just does not function with any distractions. So independently of that, do you think that individual and other individuals feel like that because they see an unfairness in the system? And I think that the system is unfair. I think it's primarily unfair along economic lines. But do you think that's why that sentiment is so pervasive?
I mean, I think people often believe stupid things for accurate historical reasons. I mean, I think my feminist friends believe that they are oppressed because women used to be treated terribly, worse than blacks or Irishmen by most metrics. I mean, if you want to talk about races versus sexism, yeah, I mean, that may be the case. For that matter, I think men often make random comments about women being either prudish or quote unquote whores because they're looking at norms that existed in other eras. They're imagining the body count, if you will, in the 1960s.
Idiotic. Idiotic conversation. It's such a stupid thing to be talking about. Okay, so
lame guys that worry about being good in bed. But the point though is that people often believe things that, and I think there is a point here. People often believe things that may have a deep, real cause, but that aren't real. And I think this is important. So the black community absolutely does believe it is oppressed. I mean, I think there are some fakers. I would put Ben Crump, who can't really walk around in what to me looks like a $1,500 Brooks Brother top line suit. Think about getting one if this next book does well. But he can't actually walk around and think that he is a victim. I don't think that's real. But I think the average guy sitting on the building stoop in Harlem probably does feel that way. Yeah. The problem is that's not real, really. That guy is disadvantaged. But as you said, 80+% of that's class. You can see a lot of guys sitting on stoops here in Appalachia. They're just white. So it's important to take apart the narrative and get what's true out of it and discard the rest. And black Americans, and I think Americans in general, are being encouraged to do the exact opposite.
Okay, so let's talk about people feel that way. Their lived experience, if you will, or their experience of subjectivity is probably multi-causal. It probably comes from a knowledge of genuine and acute historical injustices. It comes from a legacy system that we have. So there are a lot of reasons. It also comes from a fabricated media narrative that there are Nazis running around everywhere, and that the system has been designed. So this is where I think both the left and the right have failed. And tell me if if my reasoning is in error. The right has failed because they haven't adequately funded these school systems. The left has failed because it's operated under the assumption it's operated on multiple assumptions. But let's go for the right thing first. So I don't understand what is preventing, and maybe this is too global of a question, but maybe I'll frame it in terms of a hypothetical instead of a practical. If we could remediate some of those discriminatory embedded practices of disproportionate incomes going to wealthy systems, or maybe we just change the taxation and incentive structure for where people live and where the money goes in their neighborhoods. In other words, if we could make schools as John Rawls says, public education accessible to everybody of the first rate, and then whatever disparities would exist on the outside of that, people couldn't claim that it was systems. But people can claim that the systems are responsible for the disparities in outcomes because the systems themselves are inherently unequal, correct?
I think that's true. If you actually look at the quant numbers here, as opposed to the sort of philosophical or sociological theories, that's true to a much smaller extent than most people would theorize. And I suspect you may know that and just asked a very good question there. But like, just in terms of like black schools last year, I think got slightly more money in terms of overall funding than white schools. So that's it. Once again, kind of like if you look at the most successful groups in the nation that's alleged to be brutally white supremacist, and they're East Indians, Jews,
Exactly.
Nigerians, Chinese Americans, so on.
Ashkenazi Jews.
Yeah, Ashkenazi, Sephardi. Well, Sephardi Jews are in the top 20 as well. But it's just like, if you look at that, good performance by all of the members of the Jewish community, generally, at least in economic terms. But if you look at that, if the claim is the country is white supremacist and the best educated group is Nigerians and the most financially successful group is Indians, your argument has been found wanting. And it's the same thing here. I mean, if you actually look at funding differences between white and black schools, the black schools have a slight edge. There are reasons for this. Poor urban schools generally are aware of and apply for a lot of governmental supplementary programs that poor rural schools don't. Poor urban schools are often the beneficiaries of what in Chicago we call, I think, TIF districts, where the city will collect money from the community overall. And Chicago's second only to New York in the USA when it comes to concentrations of wealth and so on the Gold Coast, the North Shore. And those can then be directed to specific struggling districts, yada, yada, so on down the line. It's also worth noting that a poor urban district like Harlem, that really means a violent district. I mean, the average income in the south side of Chicago or in North Harlem is very different from the average income in West Virginia. I mean, so those are not actually by any normal standard underfunded school districts.
Okay, so then you're only left with two alternatives. You're left with culture, you're left with genetics, a kind of race realism, right? You're left with some cultural practice, and then again, that would explain Nigerians, or you're left with some a genetic explanation, right? I mean, or is there? I don't think there's a third. I mean, it's systems, genetics, or culture.
Well, there are multiple explanations here. And I'd like to do a coherent multivariate model with, I've talked about this with Bo Wingard, who's a hereditarian. I've talked about this with some of the people I mentioned earlier who are kind of racialist, Kendiangelist types. But you can put all this stuff in there. I don't see any reason you couldn't. I just don't know how to code the proxies for everything that's not culture, really. So, open kind of invitation there for people that want to actually look at every potential variable that could be affecting these outcomes. But I don't think it's true that it's just systems per se, culture. I actually am a culture and systems theorist. I think those two often go together. Or genetics. So racism would be a fourth alternative, actually. The system could be influenced by past racism, but not be racist, as versus black suffering and income because of outright racism and hiring. So again, all this could be adjusted for. You could look at the level of bias in each state, and you could measure the impact on the down road dependent variable of black incomes or black test scores. But I tend to be a strong culturalist on this. There may be slight genetic differences.
I do as well. Yeah.
No, I knew that. Good stuff. We're right. But I mean, I think there may be small genetic differences between. Actually, I don't even necessarily think that in terms of intellectual ability. It is not an evil idea that there are small genetic differences between human groups. It's one of the oldest ideas in the social sciences. Arthur Jensen wasn't a foaming mouthed Klansman, but there are real problems for that. So, I mean, for example, something like the 70% majority of Hispanics identify as and test as Caucasian. At least 50% what we would define as white in census terms. The Hispanic mean IQ is the same as the black mean IQ. I mean, Charles Murray, who's no hippie, puts blacks at 91 and Hispanics at 92, I believe, in Facing Reality, which is specifically a book about genetic contributions to gaps in society, or about gaps in society, which I'm pretty sure Murray thinks are genetically caused primarily. But I mean, so like it's impossible to explain how for at least 2 to 3 generations, these Caucasian Hispanics have scores that are 10 points different from other Caucasians. It's at least very difficult. You could try to use an immigration selection argument, but to explain why Nigerians are like the 4th highest earning black group these days, by the way.
So let's go back to that chart. And there's also, you know, when you parse out and you make it more granular, it's cold climate Asians. And when you parse out the Ashkenazi Jews, it's Jews from a very specific region around Bratislava and parts of Germany that are now Poland. So if you look at this, it's Indian Americans are the top, Filipino Americans, Taiwanese Americans, Sri Lankan Americans, Japanese Americans, Malaysian Americans, Chinese Americans, Pakistani Americans, boom, white Americans. This is medium household income in the United States by ethnic group. That alone is amazing to me. This is the worst systemically, like, this is not, how could this be white supremacy when the top income, when whites are in the middle and the top income earners. And I saw something, Reed, if you could find it, it was normed out. I think I tweeted it in my Twitter feed, I quote tweeted it, the percentage of whites would decrease to admission to the Ivy League schools.
Every top school,
Yeah, every top school that would decrease. Like, how could that be an example of white supremacy? Of course, the response to that is when people don't want to have a conversation with you, or they don't want to do the intellectual work to rebut what you have to say, they don't engage you. I've just talked to Jim yesterday, James Lindsay, and he said that I told him that I thought there was something embedded in the structure of the ideology that prevents people who believe this stuff from wanting to have a talk, so the ideology won't be dislodged. He told me it's that they're petrified of being a conservative, and talking with me would make them be sympathetic to conservatives. It's a Maoist idea. Okay, so this is a Wesley Yang's thing, and then Reed, I think it's earlier than that, but the percentage of young adults who said that a college degree is very important fell from 41 to 74. That's, again, something I've been talking about for a long time, the crisis of legitimacy in our institutions. But I want to talk to you about solutions. And Reed, you had the Mentimeter up for solution ideas. Like, I want to talk to you about, the problem is overdiagnosed. I've been screaming about it for years. Nobody listened to me. Here we are. What do we do about those, that guy, those people in Puerto Rico? Or, you know what, before we do that, Reed, put up the street epistemology video we did in Arizona. And again, when we go, Reed and I go all around the world, and I'm just heartbroken that so many of our fellow citizens, it's in Colorado, thanks, that so many of our fellow citizens think this way. This just does not bode well for the democracy. And I think to figure out what we have to do about this is our next piece of work. I will say that the number one thing that we have to do about it from the get-go is to be honest about the nature of the problem. You cannot solve any problem unless you're being honest about it. And it makes it very difficult to be forthright in your speech when there are a bunch of people, the same usual suspects over and over, constantly calling us fascists, racists, Nazis, pigs, when we're genuinely trying to think of how do we create the most fair system. All right, Reed, throw up that video from Colorado and check this out, Will.
Because they wanted to keep erasing my Black Lives Matter and Happy Black History Month. They were coming to him unnecessarily. So it doesn't matter how the person that was being confronted reacted, because if you feel as if you didn't necessarily do anything wrong, why am I being taunted? Why am I being kept like I did something wrong? My situation, you could say I did something wrong. I sprayed Lysol at someone because they wanted to keep erasing my Black Lives Matter and Happy Black History Month board off of my door, my personal board. And they called the cops on me. And, she came, she might have known the situation, but her main concern was you spray Lysol at them, and like that was just it.
What do you mean at them? Like in their face?
Like
Is that what you mean?
I mean, not necessarily. I opened the door and sprayed Lysol. That's what happened.
So you responded with something physical to something that they.
There was a whole nother situation where they were literally harassing me. They were kicking my door and everything else.
They were kicking your.
Yes.
They're kicking your door.
There was CSU PD needs to be abolished because it's overly funded. Everything else is underfunded. If we had all these other student organizations that were more funded
Pause.
and they could provide more training.
Okay, so I wanted to do the claim. There are three things going on in this. I wanted to do the claim that the Colorado campus police department should be defunded, and someone said, no, you should do the claim that it should be abolished. And I said, that's just too crazy. Literally nobody is going to say that it should be abolished. And sure enough, there are some people who are holding signs saying that the police department should be. I'm not making this. We did the claim, the videos, anybody can watch the video. We got the video right there, and the people think it should be abolished. So I don't make people accuse me of making stuff. I'm not making stuff up. Those people aren't actors. They're like actual students who attend the university. So we've got multiple things going on here. What do we do about that? What do we do about the? It seems to me that and maybe this is just my lens, but it seems to me from the data I've seen, race relations in this country have gotten worse. My own idea is that we're indoctrinating people with critical race theory. We're teaching them to see difference. We're teaching them that a microaggression is to be colorblind. I think that we have done this to ourselves in a very real way. I also think that perhaps this is a tad extra topical, but I also think this is an active disinformation campaign by enemy states funneled in through my friend Faisal Al-Mutar was telling me about this, BLM, et cetera, funneled in through the Middle East and by China in particular, but Russia secondarily. And it's not a conspiracy theory. Look at Faisal Al-Mutar from Ideas Beyond Borders has talked about this. So the question is, what do we do about this? I was hoping that from Obama, the race relations would be much better in this country. It seems that my hopes were dashed. I go around and I find this attitude to be ubiquitous. The system is against Black people. I don't know. It's heartbreaking, and I don't really know, other than my very specific expertise facilitating conversations among people who disagree or cross gulfs. I don't know what we can do in terms of an intervention to fix the feeling that people. I mean, that must be a horrible feeling to live like that, where you think that the whole country is out to get you. Other than giving people a public education of the first rate and healthcare of the first rate up into 18 or 21, I have no idea what to do about this problem.
Yeah, I mean, so the actual solutions aren't very difficult at all. I mean, so like we were talking about some of the issues for kind of the hereditary and this can't be fixed model. I mean, I noticed when you put the highest incomes, which generally match the highest test scores up on the screen, 4 of those were from quote unquote hot land countries. I mean, India, Sri Lanka, and so on, which are some of the legendary human civilizations. I mean, Sri Lanka used to be Ceylon. So a lot of this stuff, like there's a strong correlation between IQ and being further from the equator would have been wildly implausible at any time in history until maybe 270 years ago. I mean, the Norway and all these places, the Slavic countries, I mean, no insult to friends from there, but we're backwaters. I mean, their income was on par with much of Africa. Norway was the Vikings, so that has nothing to do with people's genetic potential. Norway now is a civilized socialist state, but it's wildly nonsensical to say that Persia, Greece, China, Italy, India were doomed to a lower level of civilizational development because of the latitudes at which they were located. I mean, so in
Yeah.
terms of like what you can actually do to West Africa was in many ways much more developed than far northern Europe. And this is all just a historical fact, like what year did they begin widely using iron and so on? Anyone with a book a library
Oh,
card
yeah,
can
yeah.
find this
Gun,
stuff.
germs, and steel is great for that Jared Diamonds thing. You also have the 4 Asian tigers. But I'm sorry I interrupted you. I
No,
gotta
no, but I
get
mean,
out of
in
that,
fact,
that
like
habit.
West Africa and Ghana and Dahomey and all that began using the advanced metals before most of the Europeans did. They just had a lot of other problems. You can't really build cities in a lot of inland Africa, the disease environment, and so on. But I mean, so very lightly populated with the actual cannibal tribes and so on. A fascinating history, really. But anyway, like, I think that there are very simple things that Black Americans, or for that matter, the poor whites that I often have, the lower income
Please,
Appalachians I often have as students, so on, could do. One of the
please.
most obvious is that, I mean, the Brookings Institute came out and rather awkwardly in 2017 noted that they had studied how students perform in school across a number of schools for more than a year. And they had found that Asian Americans do, I think it was twice as much homework as whites and 3 times as much as Blacks. And this tracks exactly with what you might think of as any culturally caused gap in academic performance. Correlations like 0.97. So, I mean, it really very often is as simple as if everyone did the same amount of intense study with an older brother or a tutor or their father, you'd
Yes.
probably see very, very similar scores across the 3 large single ethnicity populations within a couple of points. That's where the effects of race or even genes would come in. I mean, so that's the answer. It's that simple. Like if everyone did the same amount of work in the same way, if everyone could be made to do that, and legitimate schools like Ian Rose Vertex Academy, quote unquote Miss Snuffy's Michaela, get pretty close to this. I mean, you can see the outcomes for students of different races in those academic environments. Most of these gaps would close. I mean, it's a simple statement that if you're a hereditarian, you think they'd close 55%. If you're a culturalist, you think they'd close 100%. That's it.
Correct.
So the question is, why don't we do that? And this is where you get into the fact that many people in society believe crazy nonsense. There was a study a couple of years back that I cite in Taboo that asked a group of African American business people what they thought about a situation where a Black kid and a white kid with the same scores were applying to an Ivy. And the Black people, who are like tax paying solid citizens, almost universally said, more than 65%, the white kid would be more likely to get in. It's a level of almost derangement, just like the
Yeah.
idea that STEM academies discriminate against Black women when they're looking for students and faculty members. Not really. I mean, like that's the politest way I can think of to put that. But like the idea that Black people are underrepresented on television, or there's no interest in the Hispanic culture or cuisine. Like these are claims that might have been true in like 1940 in the South or 1940 in the North. They're not true in 2023 anywhere. So I guess the second point would be for people like yourself, myself, and many people better known than either of us, although for less good cause. But I mean, need to start using platforms to actually say what the truth is. And that's one reason why I keep writing. I mean, I'm well liked in my community. I did okay in the market. I'm sure a lot of people would prefer I'd shut up and, became like a local squire type and worked on my golf game, which currently sucks. But I mean, like the idea that if you know something that's this obvious, like it's not good that 93% of academics are partisan leftists, you should say it. That's step one, tell the truth. And step two is when people have accepted the truth, the actual problems in Black or poor white communities are not all that difficult to fix. How do you reduce crime? Cops and armed citizens. It's worked for 10,000 years since the first King's Watch. The question is, the problem really is that the light struggles ever against entropy. Postmodernism and all these ideas are just theories of entropy. That's all they are. Evil, and I think it's fair to apply the phrase banal evil to a lot of this. Evil is just the force of entropy refracted through human actors. So you take something that could be impressive, expansive, exponential is the word that comes to mind, and you make it less impressive, expansive, and exponential by destroying the ability of its component parts to function. So, for example, promoting discord among the usually friendly ethnic groups in an imperial scale nation is an act of entropic evil. refusing to teach small children because you think that such and such a technology came from the whites or the blacks or whatever, and so it's bad, is an act of entropic evil. All of this stuff. I mean, even the relationship nonsense that we see on Twitter, like men's rights activists telling men that they shouldn't want to have sex with sexually experienced women that like men and are now going to be totally faithful, or feminists saying that women shouldn't want to have sex with dominant, wealthy men. Those are probably the two worst pieces of relationship advice that I could imagine. It's hard to think of worse. So, I mean, you're taking people that would have been a very happy couple, what I just described. You're taking people and telling them that this sort of basic thing, having sex with your partner, guy takes the lead 6 to 7 times out of 10, that is bad. That's unusual. That is something that's going to confuse a lot of young people and make something that seems obvious and natural seem clunky and difficult. And so you're going to have fewer babies. We're below replacement fertility. You're going to have less functional couples, like overly dominant women and overly submissive men, or overly aggressive women and men who are frightened of their wives, and all these pairings that you see online trying to explain that they're actually joyous. That's a little outside my area of expertise. I'm sure there are more technical ways to put both of those, but all of this falls in that entropic category. You're taking something that works. You should marry someone you like and want to sleep with, and complicating it with bullshit. And that's all postmodernism can ever do. There are technical terms for it, as you know, queering, the hermeneutics of suspicion. If someone from your society, the hermeneutics of suspicion, which is
anthropology, actually, but yeah,
but it's crept into political science as well. And you really see this. I was talking with Bruce Gilly on one of our podcasts.
Oh yeah, he's a buddy of mine.
Yeah, he's a great guy. But I mean, like, I had talked, at least from like what I've seen of him, a couple podcasts, but he's a highly intelligent guy that I've enjoyed kind of bantering back and forth with about these esoteric questions, like, was even Spanish colonialism good? But the best sort of nerd, which is what you want in an academic. But Bruce Gilly was talking to me and he was like, don't you notice, as someone who does research, like looking through the reams of evidence about colonialism, that a lot of it from the Europeans from at least 1900 on is rather well researched, and it seems to obviously indicate that the goods outweighed the harms, and this is measurable. How many died during the highly civilized Sukoto Caliphate before the whites arrived, which also kept records, as versus under British rule, and so on. And it struck me the answer is obviously yes. Why don't we just say that? Well, it's because of the idea of the hermeneutics of suspicion. Right. Anything from your own society has to be looked at in a negative, critical light, torn apart, whereas the ideas of your enemies should be looked upon favorably. And again, it's the idea of entropic evil. Is that likely to be good or bad for you as a society?
Yeah, it's interesting. Bruce Gilly is now the most hated, since I left, Bruce Gilly is now the most hated man at PSU. And the grief that, right, we always make that joke to him. I haven't talked to him in a while, but the grief that he got from the case for colonialism, his argument is fascinating. Let's just talk about this very, very quickly. It's that, and I'm no expert on colonialism. I mean, Bruce is an expert on colonialism. And it's interesting, by the way, that people didn't want to debate him when he challenged them to a debate, but they wanted to shut him down, take away his Ph.D., the petition online. You look good with those glasses.
I put them on because it's getting serious and wonky. Political
science is getting serious and wonky. Yeah, the argument is that not that colonialism was good, but that it was better than the alternative, and people would vote for their feet with their feet. And some of these guys like King Leopold, geez, he's a fucking lunatic. But his what they would do with the palm trees, cutting the people's hands. I mean, crazy stories. But his story and his argument is very interesting. And the fact that they are coming for him, they've been trying to get him out there, coming for him with a vengeance. Okay, let's do this. Reed, do we have any super chats? Can we post those up for Will? Where are you now, man? Where are you?
Right now, I'm just in Frankfort, Kentucky. This is my office on the campus. So in back of me, I mean, you see a bookshelf, my own texts upon it. But that's about it. Yeah.
All right, Jamie Julian, $10. Keep up the great conversations, Peter Reed. Hope the spelling's correct. Yes, it is. Reed is Reed is the brains behind this operation, as you know, and not just the technical brains, but Reed is like my better brain. Thanks, Jamie Julian, for $10. We appreciate that. I have a nonprofit. All the stuff, none of it goes to me. It all goes to fund the nonprofit, so I can pay everybody. Come on ground, $5. Wilfred, thanks for all your work. Are you seeing signs of any shift away from woke? Great question.
Yeah, I am actually. And I think this gets into a point that I made to young men today. Like, I went online and I actually got into a bit of an argument with Cernovich, who I like in general. But I said, like, something I'm noticing with the online right is that people seem to be moving into this weird doomer space that not only doesn't include success in academia or business, but doesn't include anything that's traditionally masculine. So you have guys saying you shouldn't watch sport on television, turn off the NFL or the Premiership. You shouldn't play sports. All these integrated teams are out to get you. You shouldn't date. These women are all feminist whores. Excuse me. I mean, like, just on and on. You shouldn't join the army. You shouldn't own a pit bull or a terrier. Just like all this crazy stuff. And so I asked, why is this? And guys started responding, it's because society hates us. We've lost. We have no choice but to move away. And my reaction was kind of like, to where? Like, I live in Appalachia. We have computers. Like, you're not going to escape the basic ideas of society anywhere. You have to get in there and kind of fight. There's a conservative party. There's a liberal party. This is going to be going on for the next 200 years. We're going to win more than half the time. And I think that this round, peak woke has passed. Many things that would have been accepted during like the hyper George Floyd era would now be mocked as ridiculous, I think. That's pretty obvious. If you propose painting Black Lives, just thinking in terms of like local leader terms, if you propose painting Black Lives Matter down the main drag in Frankfurt or Louisville, I mean, people would laugh at you, would shut you off, that you turn on the next mic at the meeting. And I think that that's also true on a larger scale. When you look at groups like Moms for Liberty, FAIR's had its issues we've talked about, but I mean, like that whole wave that they were part of, FIRE, 1776 Unites. I'm never going to stop shouting out Bob Woodson's group, Conservative Black Response, the 1619 Project. I mean, the majority of those have taken in tens of millions of dollars and are still here. And the ideology that they were fighting, like defund the police, the quote unquote porn in the school, so on, that seems to have been dramatically weakened. So yes, I think there's a successful backlash.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to debate, have a debate with Michael Schellenberger right before the Twitter files came out about that. There's no question that we've passed, in my mind, we've passed peak woke, but I feel compelled to say to you, in the interest of honesty, that I have been wrong about that before. Just when I think things can't get any stupider, they've gotten even more stupid than I thought that was all possible. All right, any other chats or questions, Reed? Jordan, $5. Hey, Jordan, thanks. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received, and how has it influenced you? Also, you will have to do another AMA soon, Peter. Sure, would be happy to. The best piece of advice you've ever received. You want to go first, or should I?
Sure. I mean, one of the best pieces of advice I've ever received, which I apply to everything from the market to relationships, is look at what people do, not what they say. And this comes up in terms of almost every conversation that we've had today. Like, do men want smart, sometimes kinky female partners, and do women want like aggressive, sometimes dominant guys? As versus like, do couples want what is presented as the norm on, say, feminist Twitter would be one example. Do people actually seek, moving away from like the R-rated relationship stuff, do people actually seek diversity when they're looking for neighborhoods to live in with kids? You can argue it's good or bad that they don't necessarily, but should they, or do they? I mean, just on and on down the line. Like when I'm making some purchases in the securities market, I mean, one question that comes up a lot from younger investors is about the actual impact of climate change. Yeah. And something I will frequently say is what almost sounds like a joke, but isn't at all. Like, you can track this by checking the price of, say, beachfront property or stock in the now 11 companies that manufacture seawalls and cloud seeding systems. Like, is there evidence that what people are saying they're actually doing? And so, I mean, along all these metrics, like, I mean, I think it's obvious what I think about number one and number three. But for the second thing I mentioned, liberal whites are very, very prone to saying that one of the most important things in their life is diversity. They wouldn't work for a non-diverse company, so on, and live in the whitest areas of any group of people in the country. It's legendary to the point that it's a joke. If you see a lot of Black Lives Matter signs on lawns, you're in an all-white upper-class area, so I think that basic point, like, if you want to know how to succeed in life, look at what people are actually doing, or ask somebody who's actually done it. Don't listen to what people who have nothing to lose by talking and so can virtue signal say. If you want advice on marriage, even as opposed to listening to me, I mean, like, talk to 10 older married men or women at a bar, and you'll hear a lot of just real practical, like, do the chores sort of advice. and you'll probably have a very happy relationship. But watch what people do, not what they say.
Yeah, I think that was a great piece of advice. I'm going to give a very different piece of advice. Jordan said the best, but I'll give three. Wish someone had told me this when I was much younger. One best piece of advice I can give someone is cut back on your sugars. It's the best thing that I've ever done is cut back on my sugars. The second piece of advice, it sounds like a silly piece of advice, but you'll feel so much better. Sugars, just I'm going to say Gary Taub, and then I'm going to get 10 comments about people who hate him. But I'm completely convinced that sugar is truly terrible for you when we overconsume, and it's at least part of the obesity epidemic is predicated on that. The second thing is, if you read a word, you should read that. I guess that goes without saying, or maybe it doesn't, but read. And I'd also include in reading, like listening to books on tape or audiobooks. Shermer does a lot of biking where he listens to a lot of books. But within that, if you come across a word and you don't know the meaning of the word, not only should you look up the word, but you should also look up the etymology of the word. Where does the word come from? What are the roots of the word? And if you do that long enough, you'll not only develop a better vocabulary, but you'll have a better understanding of the world. Embedded within that is that you have to forgive yourself if you have to look a word up 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 times and you just don't get it. Just forgive yourself. The third piece of advice, I had knee surgery, and I wish someone had told me this when I was younger. And I want to say, don't take my word for it. Just look it up, the research, look at it yourself. My knee surgeon gave me a wonderful piece of advice. I asked him about squatting. He said the most important thing is that, it's going to sound so stupid, and I read this guy's book. I never go to Instagram. The only thing I watch on Instagram is this one video of one guy called knees over toes. When you squat, put your knees over your toes. So those three things are, when you do almost anything, make sure your knees are over your toes. And when you get to be, if you're fortunate enough to get to be my ripe old age of 57, you won't have bad. A lot of older people need knee surgery, and there's a lot of speculation as to why that is, but you can forego many of those problems by putting your knees on your toes. So sugar, look up words, forgive yourself if you forget one, and look at where does the word come from? Remember that, read it, and then put your knees over your toes when you work out. Okay, cool. So I want to thank you so much for talking to us, talking to me, and hanging out with me. And I have tremendous respect for your boldness and your forthright speech. And I love your Twitter feed, and I really enjoy what you do. Oh, we have one more question. Gav said from Substack. Let's take a last question. I've been working on my Substack lately. I really enjoy Wilfred's commentary. Oh, we lost it. Wilfred's commentary analysis. I was just listening to one of his YouTube videos yesterday. Many in the right seem to have been fans of the now unconstitutional stop and frisk policies. That came up in the debates, the presidential debates. Whereas many in the left lament the number of guns on the street. I'd love to know what Wilfred thinks about the plausibility of the idea of implementing stop and frisk checkpoints in high crime areas that merely search for and confiscate illegal guns without the accompanying criminal prosecution for possessing one. This seems like it could price armed criminals. This seems like it could price armed criminals out of the market if they have to frequently buy new guns to replace the confiscated ones, yet their income source is contingent upon already having one. Wow, that's quite a question.
Yeah, so I would support that. I would also just support stop and frisk if you can adopt some policy that's within the constitutional guidelines. Police do that all the time. Right? So they can't fully search you unless they have probable cause. But if they have RS, as a street officer would put it, reasonable suspicion, they can do a light pat down. They can do a gun check. I'm sure there are things like $50 magnetometers you can buy at the spy store that cops could now use without even touching you. So I would support, within the boundaries of the law, them doing everything they can. I think I just gave 2 suggestions there that they could adopt. And there's actually a deeper point here. I discussed the concept of evil earlier, but to me, that means something almost practical. Like entropy is actually a force of natural life. Human moral rules, I think, reflect reality, but to some extent are made up outside of, say, 10 or 12 baselines. Don't rape tribes women or kill your kids or whatever. I mean, so like our street level policing policy is not something that's ever mallow per se. It's just kind of what we decide on within the constraints of one or two constitutional decisions. So I support the policing policy that'll have the fewest number of knuckleheads with guns on the street. As an urbanite, a black man, whatever else. I mean, I'd have the same position, I suspect, if I were an Italian American in Chicago, and I will note. But I mean, that's pretty much it, I think. With one additional note about that last point, a lot of people are very reluctant to accept obvious trade-offs that strike them as being a bit amoral, not even immoral, which is why I brought up ethics. So like what Bukele's doing in El Salvador obviously is going to reduce crime. There's almost a eugenic element to this. I mean,
those videos are insane, by the way. If you've ever seen videos of what he's doing, of putting all those guys in the prisons, and I mean, it's like, wow.
Yeah, it looks like it sucks to be in prison in El Salvador, and it shouldn't have committed those rapes. You know, like it's just, I really don't. I would probably come a bit short of doing that. It's pretty obvious about 10% of those guys are innocent. You see people without tattoos in those prisons and so on. But I mean, a bit short of that bar, it's obvious that hard body policing solutions, like an actual checkpoint in a neighborhood that's been declared dangerous enough to meet some kind of standard by the chief with the mayor signing off, it's obvious that's going to reduce crime. People might not like saying that, but we know that it will. And yes, I generally support that.
Yeah, it's interesting. The crime rates in El Salvador were extremely high. They had the highest murder rate in the hemisphere. Someone needs to fact check me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's true.
The world.
Yep. And the crime rates have fallen dramatically. I'm not making a justification for it. I'm just giving the practical. So then, you know, there's an old expression: 1% of the criminals cause. Yeah, there it is. That's a great shot. 1% of the criminals cause you know, I can't remember what the vast majority of murders, 90% or so. But I talked to a buddy of mine who, I don't know, I'm not going to mention his name, but he's very much in this space, and he told me it's not 1%. He told me that the data is overwhelming. It's like 7 people. There's like 7 people in every city who go around and they commit the vast majority of murders. And the idea is to put your resources and aim your interventions at those 7 people. There's a similar statistics for, you know, I've talked about this before. I find it fascinating that the number of people who a sliver, it's like, I think it's around 100 people in any given city up until fairly recently were responsible for some truly crazy percentage of the medical expenditures for the city and entire counties, like 40%. And when you drill down on that and understand why, it's because they go to the emergency ward. Yeah, that's a picture of the like that's amazing. And look at the number of officers there in that photo. Like, wow. So anyway, that's happening in El Salvador. But the idea is that there's a small number of people responsible for a disproportionate amount of crime, and any social or legal intervention should be focused on those people to solve the problem. Okay, cool. Anything else on your mind you wanted to throw out before you've been so generous with your time?
Yeah, actually, that's a great segue into one of my points in overall, which is the importance of culturalism, or what I mean by that is versus probably 2 more popular, much more badly flawed alternatives, which are racialism and genetic hereditarianism.
Yeah.
For decades, the highest murder rates in the world were not in Black countries. They were not in Eastern European countries. They were in Caucasian Hispanic countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, so on. We now just saw those countries get tired of that and cut their murder rates from 80 per 100,000 to 6. Any country could do the same. All they did was kill or lock up the murderers. You can come up with various moral rationales why we shouldn't do that, most of which I think are pretty nonsensical. I mean, who got it going on? The weak or the strong? Gang murderers don't have any rights. In the USA, that's technically not true, but you've obviously chosen to live by the sword, and I don't think there's a lot of public sympathy for you. But so first of all, in many cases, that should be done logically. But secondarily, whether or not you think it should be done, it's extremely obvious that what we're seeing could happen anywhere and could cut murder by the same 93% anywhere. And that's what I mean by cultural solutions. If you can convince people to study twice as much, the group that used to study 0.5x, and this now
Right.
studying X is going to do as well as everyone else. So this is actually an excellent illustration. That's pretty much just my point there. I'm pro Bukele on this one, but difficult to adopt here.
Yeah, Heather McDonald says she isn't just the most forthright person, and I hung on a lot with her when I was in Hungary. She said that she won't buy the systemic. She would only buy the systemic explanation if African Americans started acting like Asian Americans after a generation, and those disparities still existed.
That's correct. Yeah,
I
think that's one of those things you're not supposed to say, but like you could sub in blacks. One thing I do want to say is that blacks aren't an especially unique group. I mean, when you look at a group of 40 million with an income of 50,000 per year, average IQ boards of 91, I mean, that's extremely typical. I mean, the many Hispanic groups, that's a hit of most Native groups. So, I mean, the idea that if that group adopted strategies used by other equal-sized, more successful groups, changed the name Black and Asian to Filipino specifically and Appalachian, that's totally controversial.
I was just going to say that. Yeah. I was just going to say you change it, people wouldn't respond so negatively.
The white IQ, the white board score in West Virginia is 92. This, by the way, like I'm absolutely not a racist. I don't think that whites, maybe 1 or 2% difference, but are genetically inferior on the ball field. I mean, the NBA used to be about half white. You had Pete Maravich and all those guys out there. I think white guys now play soccer. I don't think blacks are incapable of reading books. I mean, West Africa sure looks like it's growing against the horizon, doesn't it? I think that there are long-held cultural variables that tend to be very problematic and very hard to dislodge. If there's a slight effect of genes or racism that plays into that, things get worse. But I mean, like I said, I live in Appalachia. So like when you talk about high crime areas or when you talk about a 92 IQ score, unbelievable, all you have to do is walk outside. Like those same things will exist everywhere. You have certain pressures. What's the out of wedlock childbirth rate in West Virginia? So that's a reality. And I'm not unsympathetic to West Virginians. I want to help them too.
Yeah. All right. Last super chat, and then I'm gonna let you go. Super chat. We have 4 minutes. John Lalane, $9.99. Thanks, John. Look up ISM idea backed by authority adherence to set of beliefs. Latin root idea slanted to one side. Also, Dom James Klug Surf. Does James Klug? Yeah, I did a thing with him. My dad had the first exercise TV show ever. You're killing it on OB. Cool. Awesome. Thanks. Thanks, John. I appreciate that. We're running out of time here. Will, where can people find you?
I'm pretty easily accessible. I mean, I'm in the tail end of that internet generation, but I'm in it. What I always say is just Google me. I'm Wilfred Reilly, Wilfred Reilly. If you do that, you'll find my Twitter. You'll find my Facebook for the people over 30. You'll find my website, albeit just a link to the university website. I'm on Amazon for all my books. All of which, without false modesty, were bestsellers of some kind. So, I mean, they're pretty easy to find. So, I mean, like, yeah, just check me out. I'm at that level of, H-list celebrity where I'll still argue with you. Yeah, that's the Twitter in the background I see.
Yep, and they're clear, they're data-driven, they're evidence-based, they're accessible, and they're interesting. That's what I would say about your books. And I personally, again, the hate crimes hoax was very profound to me, and thanks for all you do. All right, don't log out yet. We're gonna log off. Thanks everybody for listening to Conversation with Peter Boghossian, and thank you, Will. I genuinely enjoy our conversation and your voice. Thanks, man.
Super chattios.